Hey guys, this is Strength Coach Friedman with the Strength Coach Friedman podcast. Today I am joined by my longtime friend, Tim Malico. Today Tim and I are going to be talking a little bit about training for the military.
Hi Mark, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So Tim is a certified personal trainer. He's been working in the field for a while. And he also attended the TSAC, which is the Tactical Strength and Conditioning Practitioner's Course in Colorado, which goes a little more into the strength and conditioning specifically for the tactical athlete. Tactical athletes include your soldiers, many times firefighters, police officers, FBI, and other individuals in this kind of law enforcement field. So a little bit on my background. I mentioned it before, but I actually formerly worked as a Department of Defense contractor where my job literally was to train the military. I worked with primarily doing physical readiness conditioning, working with the soldiers to improve their performance on the APFT, which is the Army Physical Fitness Test. But I also did other things. I had some soldiers that were looking to go into Special Forces, and we were doing some training a little more geared towards that. The baseline training, now there's a lot of different training that goes into the military, even with physical training. If you read the FM 7-22, which is the newest fitness manual that's put out by the military, there's a lot of different information in there, talking about a lot of different things that usually is the standard in which the military uses. However, the test that is really done for soldiers, that soldiers have to perform to measure whether or not they are physically ready for deployment is the APFT test, the Army Physical Fitness Test. Now, this test is pretty much congruent through all the branches. There's some variations to the test, but pretty much all the components require some sort of sit-up. The military does a sit-up, the Army does a sit-up still. Some of the other ones do a curl-up or a crunch now. There's the push-up. I believe at one point the Marines had removed the push-up and replaced it with a pull-up, but they may actually be doing both at this point in time. And then, of course, there's a run. For the Army, it's a 2-mile run. I hear for the Navy, they do a 3-mile. The Navy does a 1.5. The Marines sometimes do a 3. So it varies a little bit, time and time. But ultimately, there's those 3 components: push-up, sit-up, run. And that has kind of become the gold standard of the military. How well you can do those 3 things is how they kind of measured you as a physical specimen in the military. Again, there are other factors as well, but that's how you get scored, and those are the things that can get you points that can lead in with promotion and other things like that. So, Tim has been working to improve on these 3 things. As an individual, he's looking to join the military right now. So as someone who wants to get into the military, he wants to go in doing well so we can get to he's looking to do Special Forces. So in order to do that, you need to score very high. So Tim's been working on that for the last 7-8 months. And Tim's going to talk a little bit about what he's been doing and how that's been going for him.
So like Mark said, I'm in the process of joining the military. I've been a personal trainer. My job was a personal trainer for almost 10 years. I've worked at numerous different type of clubs, gyms, studios. So I have a good understanding of how to train the human body, myself, and the mindset that goes along with a program, especially for one that lasts almost 6 months to a year. Right now, I am with the Army, in the process of joining the Army. I started with the Navy, and I wanted to, like Mark said, go into the Special Operations. For the Navy, it's the Navy SEALs. It's the same type. It has the same various of physical fitness tests. It has a little bit more of a competitive standard, and with the Navy, a lot more swimming, especially with the SEALs. The Army has to do a lot more with carrying weight. They like to call that rucking in the military. I've been training for, like Mark said, almost 7 to 8 months, and I really wanted to focus on all 3 components because I understood that you have to be what's called a tactical athlete in a trainer's mindset. It's not just being a soldier. It's not being good at one thing. You don't have to be great at one thing. You have to be good at all of them. So running is absolutely key, your cardiovascular health. Then having strength to carrying weight, carrying your gear, being able to run, swim, whatever is asked of you, your body needs to be able to do it. So that was my mindset going in. I wanted to be able to run. I wanted to have endurance. I wanted to have strength. I also wanted to have flexibility. More specifically, mobility. I want my body to be able to move, be agile, because that's where you hear the most injuries as a civilian or in the military. A lot of people get hurt moving because their body's not used to that duration or that type of exercise for whatever reason. And the military is whatever branch, you're going in a environment, mind and body, that is going to push you to your limits. You haven't been there. They want to push you and see how far. That's where the mental toughness comes in, the resilience training. So that's what I've really been focusing on. Running, carrying weight in the weight room, training my body properly so it performs efficiently. That's the biggest thing. I wanted to start getting stronger and I wanted to start lifting weights again. I would call myself a functional trainer and not so much as a bodybuilder. I'm not a fan of just lifting weights. I'm more of compound movements. I like truly, honestly, everything is a compound movement with the human body training it. But that's where past histories where I've experienced injuries, it's because how I train my body and what I was asking for, it was two different things. So I've really been trying to make my body more efficient and prevent as much injury as possible, focusing on my weakest points. So right now, that's a little bit about what I'm going to. I can go a little bit further, but I don't want to keep rambling on.
Okay, Tim. Sounds good. So yeah, Tim's been doing a lot of stuff to prepare for this test. I know at the time when he was preparing, he consulted me a little bit, and I gave him a little bit of information regarding what I was doing with my soldiers. As I spoke about in a previous podcast with Louie when we talked about evaluation, I talked a little about, when a soldier first came to me, how I would evaluate them, what I would discuss, what were the important key factors to kind of decide whether or not this soldier was ready to jump right into activity, what they needed to do. So if you want more information on that, feel free to listen to that podcast. Today I want to talk a little bit more about the specifics of the training programs that I would design for the soldiers. So the first thing you have to consider is this individual free of injury and can they actually do exercise? I had soldiers coming to me and some of them, they couldn't do push-ups because they had hurt their wrist or they had a surgery. They couldn't run because they had a knee problem. So those individuals, first you have to really work to rid them of those injuries. The old mindset, I think, in training was always, just kind of run through it, fight through it. And as much as you need to sometimes fight through things, if you're just causing more and more damage, not the best way to do it. My philosophy is let's reevaluate how you're doing it, let's correct how you're doing it, and then let's push through. Okay? There's always going to be a little bit of pain. The idea of no pain, no gain, although a bit misunderstood, holds true in some situations. But that's more like, okay, you're having some fatigue and soreness in your muscles, not, oh man, my joints are killing me and I think I threw out my back. So if you're having those kinds of pain, things that are dealing with vertebral subluxation or, joint problems, well, in that sense, no, the pain, pushing through that kind of pain is not ideal. But going back to the actual 3 components of the PT test, many times what I would focus on is first making sure if an individual could do a proper push-up. You'd be surprised how many people cannot do a push-up correctly. One of the biggest things I would see when I would watch soldiers taking the APFT test was that their spine was not staying in the proper position. I think I spoke about this in a previous podcast. Joint angle dictates muscle function. So if your spine is in improper position, okay, if you're having improper curvature, if your muscles cannot properly contract and maintain the spine in the right spot, right there you're going to have a problem. That's the purpose of a push-up. It's not just to test your upper body endurance, but also in a horizontal pushing movement, but also how well can you stabilize your spine? Can you create enough intra-abdominal pressure to maintain a neutral spine through the duration of the exercise? It's really a moving plank that lasts for 2 minutes. You have 2 minutes to complete the push-ups, and it's about how many push-ups you can do in those 2 minutes. So I would always work on seeing, okay, how are my soldiers positioning their hands? Where are their shoulder blades? What's going on with their spine? And many times I would kind of regress the push-up into some simpler movements. Sometimes just kind of working on planking. Sometimes I would even start the planking from the knees rather than from a full straight arm plank to really train how to get into a proper hip extension and maintain the proper extension of the hips and intra-abdominal pressure through the duration of the push-up exercise. Once individuals could kind of keep their spine in the right spot and could keep their hands in the right position to do the push-ups, we would then add in some different types of push-ups. Elevating the hands, elevating the feet, changing the width of the hands, or are the hands symmetrical or asymmetrical, various different things. And of course, we would always train to the test. The perfect push-up is not going to score you high on the test. When you look at strength and conditioning protocol, like things that have been put out, like in Mike Boyle's book, Functional Training for Sports, the way he does push-ups is quite different than the military does. They're both on a 2-minute scale, but with Mike Boyle, he talks about you do your push-ups at a particular rhythm, a tempo, and if you can complete the push-ups non-stop for 2 minutes, you'll only be able to complete 50 push-ups. In the military, they ask people to do upwards of 70, 80 push-ups sometimes. So it's impossible to have good technique and do that many push-ups. You have to modify to do the military-style push-up. And in this, many times people put their hands wider. They don't have to go. The range in which their body has to travel is less, etc. So again, I would always train my soldiers first to do the push-up properly, especially if they're having shoulder pain. But then I would also say, okay, let's train to the test, and then have a combination of both of those components. For the sit-up, many times people were having back issues. Backs and necks were hurting. I know people actually herniating discs during the sit-up test from pulling on their neck too hard. So I would teach people how to do sit-ups maybe by not pulling on their neck initially. And I would also talk about how to get their body off the ground more in a proper way. Positioning the pelvis, positioning the spine in a way where they can more easily roll off the ground and let the hip flexors pull them up into the sit-up position. So different components with that. I did a lot of core work, core stability, making sure the spine was working properly, and then integrate that in to improve the sit-up overall. Now the run is the part of the test that, in my experience, most people struggle with. Many people get away with the push-ups and sit-ups. A lot of times they'll get past, even if the technique isn't pristine, but the run, there's no way around it. There's no subjectivity to the run because you have to get in at a certain time. The numbers are there. So that is where most people fall short. A big part of the problem with running is people don't know how to run.
Absolutely.
Running should really be one of the most natural movements of a human. When we actually look at the anthropology of running and human anthropology, it said that we've been running for thousands of years. Running is what allowed people to come out of the forest. It was persistence hunting, they called it. Humans are not very fast compared to other animals. We're bipedal, not quadrupedal, meaning we're on 2 feet, not 4. And most four-legged animals can whip us in a race any day. Try to race a squirrel, the thing's going to kick your ass. So squirrels, dogs, wolves, antelope, deer, anything you go up against, 4 legs are going to be 2. It's like having 2 engines having a double the horsepower in your car. It just, you're going to lose. However, what humans are really good at doing is sweating. So we're good at sweating, and we're good at breathing while we run. Many animals cannot maintain a rate of speed for a long duration, nor can they continue to breathe well. If you notice, most animals do not pant and run at the same time. They run, and then eventually they have to stop to pant and catch their breath. So humans, who are great sweaters, so we can maintain our body temperature more easily than other animals, we've combined that with our ability to track animals and our ability to breathe while running, and that is how the first runners, or the first humans, really used running towards hunting. They would chase down an animal, wait for the animal to either stop to pant, and that's when they would attack, or they would chase the animal until it literally died of heat exhaustion because it kept running and eventually collapsed. So running's been an element of human society for a long time. Today you have people saying running's bad for you and all this nonsense. That's not true. If you're doing running properly and you do not have pre-existing injuries, running's great. But that includes, having the proper footwear, not having imbalances within the foot and the rest of the body. Most people have these imbalances. So for many people, starting running can be very challenging and sometimes very painful. But running itself is not bad for the body. Running is a very natural movement that people can do well, but you just need to be ready to do it. And unfortunately, we've lost the ability to run. As children, if you ever watch a kid run, they run with much better technique than most adults. And it's not because, adults weren't taking the time to learn running. We innately know how to run. When we practice running as a kid, you're running barefoot. They go through this natural full range of movement. The back foot almost kicks up to the butt. It's a natural, proper way of running. If you watch a lot of professional runners, especially from countries outside of the United States, where they kind of grow up without shoes or just running in sandals, they have this more natural running technique. We lose that technique because we're taught to run differently. We're taught to run heel to toe, where we run in boots, we run in these big thick sneakers, and we essentially destroy our own running technique. That, in addition to just our other lifestyle choices, sitting in chairs, having high toilets, these are all things that start to limit our mobility, and when we go to run, that's going to translate over and create problems. So, a big thing I would do with my soldiers would be to talk about running technique, okay? I would show them a more beneficial running technique, one that's a little more natural, but I wouldn't force them to do that technique. Some people can pick it up really quick. Others, their technique is so ingrained in them, making a quick change could be detrimental. It's like asking someone to try to bench 300 pounds their first day. Not the best idea. So once individuals were comfortable with running, I could slowly make some modifications to the technique, but we would do that over time. Largely by doing some of the dynamic warm-ups, preparing the body, improving mobility. In addition to that, I would do some stride-based warm-ups. So we would do actual stride-based warm-ups to kind of recreate the components of proper running technique, and these should over time start to translate into improved technique. Small things, like feet turned out or in, some of those can be fixed verbally with verbal cues, as well as different stretching to get the feet back into the proper alignment. So there's a lot of things that kind of go into this whole running. I would use a variety of different drills, and of course getting them to run. So once their running was getting a little more streamlined and they could run comfortably, we would actually talk about the running programming. In the beginning, they just need to work on, most guys and girls need to work on improving their endurance. Their big issue is their oxidative energy system. They just cannot maintain the run for that long. So a way to start off would be just have them run a few minutes at a time. Try 5 minutes. See if you can go for 5 minutes without stopping. And over time, continuously build that up. Once they can maintain a run for a slightly longer period of time, we can start playing around with the workouts, making them more interesting, and improving performance overall. I usually would recommend to a lot of my soldiers, try to run 3 times a week. And each day would be a slightly different workout. One day would be what I would call the maximal effort conditioning day, where we'd be going for the 2-mile run. Practice running 2 miles. Then I would have a sub-maximal effort conditioning day, where you'd go a little longer than 2 miles, maybe 3 up to 4 miles if you worked up to it. And that would be at a slower pace, so you're not pushing as hard. And then we would have what's known as the super maximal effort conditioning day, and that would be shorter races, okay, shorter runs, but higher intensity. So maybe you would do 8 quarter-mile runs, so you'd go out, you'd run a lap on the track at a faster pace than your usual time, take a rest, and then repeat that. So you're still covering 2 miles, but at a broken down way. Now, in the beginning, you might only start off with doing 3 or 4 of these because it's a little more intense, and over time, you could add one in each week until you can do 8 in a row. And that time, you start working on either shortening the rest periods or increasing the speed. And again, there's other ways to break that up. There's times I did 200-meter workouts, 100-meter workouts to improve explosiveness and speed if that was what the person was struggling with. Sometimes you can do half miles or even mile runs. So there's many different ways you can play around with it, and you really have to gauge the individual you're working with or yourself, if you're training yourself, what's going to be best. And actually, if you look at the 7-22, they kind of talk about that as well. They have run days, they call them, I think they call them like 91-20s and 60-90s, and it just has to do with how long you're running and how long you're resting. So it's a form of interval training, and that's pretty much what I'm talking about for the super maximal effort conditioning day. So that's a little bit about running. I think if you can kind of really just stay consistent, you don't have to get fancy with your running. As long as you're running pain-free, you're doing the proper prep work, so you're doing the warm-ups. Really recommend doing soft tissue release therapy. Really work on that myofascial release. Use your foam rolling. Use a tennis ball to do different techniques. We can talk more. I can do a podcast just talking about different soft tissue things you can do. That's really huge, making sure that you're feeling good and you can continue to run. And then also how you finish up. Make sure you're doing your static stretching at the end of your running. Dynamic before, static after. And that's a real good recipe for success. Making sure you're staying hydrated, you're getting the right nutrition, you have that whole balance, and as long as you stay consistent, you're going to be able to improve and you're going to do well. Tim, what are your thoughts on your running?
I was going to interrupt you with the running because just since I was 15 years old, I played all sports, basketball, football, lacrosse, and like most high school athletes, young athletes, all they care about the upper body. Unless you're a runner, you don't understand running technique, or the biggest thing that I had to learn as a trainer for almost 10 years, I'm learning it now, is pacing yourself. He's talking about the cardiovascular side of it. It more of a mindset. It's pacing yourself. Once you start running, we don't understand. It's so unnatural to us that we just go as far as we can, as fast as we can. And then people are like, I hate running. It hurts. Because first, you haven't ran in probably over a year or 10 years, and you're trying to go for about a half hour to an hour duration of your body being in, let's call it a dance. Everything has to be in sequence. And he's saying there are so many muscular balance, physical limitations that we have, tightness in our hip flexors, our lower back, people's knees. That means you're not ready to run. I was the same exact way. Mark started teaching me when we worked together in New York Sports Club about your foundation, starting with the feet and the ground up. It's huge, and what your feet are doing, what your ankles, your knees. How do you actually train your joints? Training as a joint by joint approach. So with me, I've had a long process. I've been training for about 7 to 8 months. And I started in the beginning, I'm like, okay, I want to go into the military. I want to go special forces, but I know I can't run. So I'm going to go to the track. I need to do 2 miles. They have a 2-mile pace time. Navy has 1.5. You have to hit it in a certain amount of time. Competitive times, you got to do even better. So I'm like, you know what? I know every time I used to start running, what happens? I would go too much for too long and something would start hurting. So I'm like, I'm going to go to the track and I'm going to do 2 laps around the track. I don't care. I need to do a 2-mile run, and I have to do it in a certain amount of time. I'm going to go around the track, do it 2 times. I'm going to do that for a week. This is where being a trainer, it helps. Having that mindset and understanding less is more, and you have to pull back. And for people that are trying to go into the military, it absolutely depends. Like Mark said, the programming, it depends on when are you going. Are you leaving in 3 months, or do you have a year or 2? Because the more time you have, the better your results are going to be. Just hands down. And that's why I wasn't rushing to go into the military right away. I wanted time to train my body and properly, efficiently evolve. I didn't want to go in where I could probably beat the test. Like Mark said, people just do it. But most of those people, they come back with an injury. They don't last too long because their body it can't hold up. And especially in those conditions that most of us don't even know. Through sleep deprivation or just running everywhere. You're in boots, you're in different type of equipment, everything. It's different. So the first thing I did was just start on a track, just going around 2 laps. Let my ankles, shin splints, knee problems. That's like one of the most common things you hear with people that start running. I have shin splints, my ankles, my knees, my feet, plantar fasciitis. All these things start happening. So I wanted to add the duration slowly. So I first started 2 laps for a week, then 3 laps for a week, then 4. I could do a mile. Okay, I'm doing a mile. And then eventually, that took about almost 3 months. Now I'm up to programming, what Mark was about to get into, with the pace time, doing 1/4-mile laps, and understanding now how to pace yourself when you're doing your 2 miles. I do a 2-mile run in the beginning of the week. Then in the middle of the week, I break that down so I have an understanding. Okay, I need to understand and listen to my body and how to pace myself. That's mentally, that's with the breathing, that's with everything. Having stopwatch, having time, knowing what your lap times are is huge. And you don't have to kill yourself like most people. And then it evolves, like he was saying. What are you doing before? Warming up properly is absolutely key. And then what are you doing after? If you're just going to the track and just getting it done and then going home, then yeah, you might see some benefits. But in the long run, you're probably going to hurt yourself. I started evolving, getting more into foam rolling. Like you said, self-myofascial release. Really breaking down the actual, spots on my body where the scar tissue is, where it's taking the most brunt force, opening that up first, and then going into, depending on your workout, dynamic. Now you're preparing your body for a motion and warming up the proper muscle groups, and 100%, just by doing a proper warm-up, that can help you with your time. So all these different things, you can't just rush into them. And the military, all you want to do is just, okay, I got to get my run time. I got to do push-ups. I got to do pull-ups. And it becomes overwhelming. So in the beginning, first you focus on one thing, what you're weakest at. Most people it's running, or then you have the runners that have been running their whole entire lives that they can put people to shame. But now you start putting weight on their back, or you ask them to do push-up, pull-ups. Now they don't have upper body strength. It's depending on, you have to see what your strongest points are, and you have to know them, but you don't want to focus on them the whole entire time. Yes, you want to maintain that, but you also want to focus on your weak points in your training, whether that's cardiovascular, running, upper body, doing pull-ups, push-ups, body weight activities, or focusing now with me specifically, I'm strong in the upper body. I can do 100 push-ups. I can do almost 80 sit-ups. I can do almost 15 pull-ups. I can hit all that. But now, okay, where are you starting to feel? Okay, now my shoulder's starting to tweak. Now my knees are starting to hurt, my lower back. Now this is where a trainer mindset comes in, going to someone like Mark that understands the body, how it should perform, and step back, not go heavier, go more intense. You have to actually step back and see what you're weakest at. And for me, it was anteriorly, my chest. Most people, everything we do is forward. Driving a car, opening up a door, so we get those rounded shoulders. And everything just starts seizing up. Our upper traps, our neck, our back gets tight, our hip flexors. So opening up, getting better posture, think of a skeleton, the anatomical position, that's what you want. But for me specifically, it was looking into my rotator cuff. It's okay. My shoulder's hurting. People are going to think, we have a labrum tear, or I hurt disc, or whatever. I have arthritis or inflammation, bursitis. Most people, their rotator cuff is doing brunt force of the work because their posture, they're put in that rounded position, but you want to think back, posterior, thinking behind you. Your body needs to be in balance, front, back, side to side. And that's where having a trainer mindset is huge, but going to someone like Mark that has a understanding of how the human body works, that thinks a little bit differently than just do more push-ups, do more sit-ups, do more pull-ups, push through the pain. If you are serious about your career in the military and you want to be an elite athlete, a tactical athlete, I'm talking about special forces. So I already can pass just the basic test to get into the military. I'm already thinking, my mindset, I want to be able to go in crushing these PT tests for special operations, special forces. I don't want to just barely scrape by. I want to crush them, because what's going to happen right after you're done? They're only going to ask more. That is just the tip of the iceberg. Don't think that's as much as you're going to get done. That's just, you're asking. That's you competing for your job. And then you are just going to be pushed even more. And that's why you see most of these elite special forces, you're like, wow, they look massive. They're strong. What they can do physically, mentally, because they train for it. So the running was huge. The running was one of the biggest things for me. Still is. I'm doing under a 7-minute mile, the best even when I was in high school. But that's just one part. And now I have to understand how to maintain it, not to overrun and overtrain my body, which I have, and I've definitely noticed from not being able to sleep, being almost lethargic throughout the day, and understanding you have to pull back. If you want to go in the military and you don't know your time, they can call you tomorrow and be like, okay, you're ready to go, and you're tired. You're gonna go in already overtrained. You don't want that. Think of a fight. I've also trained in boxing. A fight camp can be anywhere between 8 to 12 weeks to get into top performance. Then you have a fight. Then you have something you need to compete, and all that training going towards. Then you get a break. You have to rest. Your body has to recover, and there's all different ways of recovering. But throughout a long duration, if you're training for over a year, that's why you can't do as much in a year than you would in 3 months. You can't have that much intensity in your training. You actually have to really break it down, separate it, and focus on one thing at a time. Okay, running. I'm going to focus on running. But you can go to the gym and do other stuff, but you can't be going 100% all the time, because your body will start breaking down. And once you start seeing your performance diminish, then you have to understand that, okay, I'm doing something wrong. I have to step back, look what I'm doing, and break it down. And personally, I've been on this journey. 7 months training, the best shape of my life, and I haven't even entered the military. My body was like, you got to stop. You got to slow down. You're getting little tweaks and injuries here and there because you're doing too much. You're not letting your body recover, and then your mindset starts going. So it's a battle. programming, understanding your time limit, when you're going in, what your weaknesses are, focusing on them, but strategically, and having someone like Mark, a strength conditioning coach that understands the human body and how to break it down. Not just someone that's just going to yell at you and say, do more, more, more. Because you might be able to get in, but trust me, it's going to be miserable from what I hear, because you're going to be hurting the whole entire time training, and you should have a better mindset than just being like, my body hurts, my body hurts. It's just going to make everything worse. That's how I'm going in. I want my mind and my body to go in as strong and efficiently as possible. And then whatever comes with it, then I can tack it. I'm in a better place instead of me hurting, going in, and I'm already at a disadvantage. All right.
A lot of good points there, Tim. You actually got me thinking of a few things I failed to mention. So you were talking a little about injuries.
Yes.
With injuries, I tend to see there tend to be three big components in running that lead to injuries. First is muscular postural imbalances. And I know of a lot of elite athletes. I had an old friend that I ran with in high school. He's now a professional runner. He usually runs. Well, he was training for the Olympics, and he was doing the 1,500-meter race. But I know, I was following a lot of his collegiate career, and he kept pulling his groin. He kept having injuries. And when I actually talked to him about, Facebook message him about, what he was actually doing, he didn't train his legs. He's an Olympic level miler. I think one of his better times was like a 3:35 in the 1,500 meter. So wow. He's an excellent runner, a talented athlete, but he kept hurting himself. And he was telling me he did upper body 3 times a day, but he didn't work out his legs. So, as a runner, do you need to be squatting heavy and doing all this stuff? No. As a soldier, having lower body strength is a key thing, and we can talk about that a little more later. But just from an injury prevention standpoint, you should be doing some light body weight exercises at the very least, and other warm-up exercises. I think of them as preparation rather than warm-up. To make sure your body's moving properly and efficiently. Because if you have imbalances, that's going to tire you out more. You're going to fatigue faster. It's going to increase your risk of injury, or at least developing acute micro trauma rather than just an acute injury. But over time, that could manifest in an acute injury. It's really, really a big thing. And just a couple, case examples. One more thing I want to note, footwear. Okay, footwear is also huge. Footwear and strike zone of the foot. So, to be honest, the best footwear for running is no footwear at all. Many of the best runners, they actually run barefoot. Now, in today's world, running barefoot's tough. We have hot surfaces. It's not like we're running on earth. There's sharp things you can step on and hurt yourself. So it's not necessarily practical. But I tend to think that the movement of the foot in its most natural state is the ideal movement for running. The way the foot is able to decelerate at the ankle, you're supposed to have that deceleration if you land more to the forefoot. The way the energy is supposed to transfer properly, and you can reuse that energy in a ballistic fashion. I really think that's the way we're meant to run. Today, many of these thick shoes have allowed people to modify their running. We do a heel strike run today. If you look at the foot, there's 4 strike zones. There's the heel strike, which is all the way in the back, which, to be honest, most people do. There's the mid strike, which is more the whole foot coming down together. Then you have the fore strike, which is more the ball of the foot making contact first, although the heel can come down after the initial touch. And then there's the toe strike. Toe strike is usually reserved for just short sprints in a straight direction. 100-meter sprint, that's going to be more of a toe strike. As you get more into middle distance, you're going to be doing more of a fore strike. And some of the long distance, if you're doing 100, you're doing a marathon, you're probably not going to be able to maintain a perfect fore strike the whole time. Probably more to the mid strike area. But somewhere between mid and fore. And it depends on the person, and for each person, it's going to be a little bit different. But I really think you want to find footwear that fits your foot comfortably, that fits your foot tight. You don't want your foot sliding around. It's an easy way to get shin splints. And you want to make sure that you're trying to keep your weight more to the forefoot. When you run, you want to think of your run as almost a free fall. So rather than reaching out in front and trying to grab the ground with your heel, think about allowing your body to fall forward and kicking your leg back. The follow-through should be behind. Your foot should be striking just below the hip. Okay? So if someone's watching from the side, foot comes down right underneath your hip, and then comes behind, your body is slightly falling forward. And if you try making some of these modifications, it's really going to help. A few people have kind of come out with their own branded versions of running in order to kind of market their running technique. I just think of it as running, but if you look into things like chi running or pose running, you can do a Google search, and it'll tell you a little bit more about some of these techniques. Pretty much all the same stuff, but it's just talking more about how you're supposed to focus on falling forward, landing, and then that ballistic movement, that movement, the point where the foot makes contact with the ground. What happens is you start to put a stretch into the muscle and the tendon of the calf. So the calf muscles. And then from there, if you transfer that energy and continue with your running stride quick enough, you can reconvert that energy, that stored potential energy, into elastic energy that's going to help propel you forward. That's the basis of plyometrics. They talk about what's called the amortization phase, which is this brief moment where, kind of like stretching a rubber band, where the elastic potential of your muscle and tendon actually stores this energy and allows you to reutilize it. It's a little more of a complex technique, and that's the premise, again, of plyometrics. But I could do a podcast just on plyometrics itself. But just when you run, if you land on your heel, the problem is you're not storing any of that energy. And then you have to recreate energy for every step. And you're also sending a lot of force all the way up through your legs. So a lot of people that have ankle problems, foot problems, pain in their knees, hips, or back are usually heel strike running. And this is sending that force all the way up. There's no absorption. They say the calf should absorb something like 70 to 90% of the energy when you land. And if you're not using that foot, you're not coming down with that force strike, that energy is all going into your body and going to cause damage. So now there's a couple case scenarios. I've trained a few soldiers over the years that were already great runners. I had one guy that was a real monster, two of them actually, and if you really think of like the ideal soldier, when you really think about, I don't want to say the stereotype, but the kind of soldier that the military wants. These guys were the epitome of that. And both of them were great runners, but they'd come to me to improve further. They had no problem passing their test, but they wanted to do better. So one guy was I believe a master sergeant at the time, and then he got promoted to sergeant major while I was working with him. So this individual, his thing was posture. He had never had an injury. The guy was a monster, but he had been doing so many sit-ups his whole life that he was so strong. He was anteriorly dominant in his torso. So he was a bit hunched. His abs were very strong. The rectus abdominis was very strong, but his spinal extensors, in the lower back, were very weak. So, he could do 200 medicine ball weighted sit-ups in a row nonstop, with a 20-pound medicine ball, but I have him flip over on his stomach and do some like eyes, Y's, and T's or a Superman or any kind of lower back exercises. He was cursing my name. He'd get through 10 and he'd be dead. So it was a severe imbalance between the anterior and posterior spinal flexion and extension. So simply by giving him some very basic exercises, body weight stuff, things to just get him more mobile, he was improving in his running. He said he didn't know what was going on. He couldn't understand why he was feeling the changes, but he really felt that he was improving, not only in his running, but in his biking and swimming as well. And I attributed part of that to lung expansion. He was so tight in the abdominal muscles, he wasn't able to get proper lung expansion. He wasn't able to get his rib cage expanding as far as it could, and I think it was actually limiting how much air he was getting. So I think by opening up and working on his thoracic extension, that actually helped him breathe a little better, in addition to improving his mobility. So again, great runner, making some very small tweaks, and he saw some great improvement. I had another soldier, a captain who I was working with, and he really said the preparation work, the soft tissue work using the foam roller, and the preparation exercises that I discussed in a previous video, the ones I actually used for my assessment, he said that was the most important thing for him. He said that alone he felt allowed him to improve the most, and I think he was able to get his score about 50 points or so on his run. So he was pretty happy about that. He said he hadn't been running that well since back in basic training. So again, very simple stuff, but making these minor changes can sometimes really be very beneficial. And again, I had another soldier. This is the other guy I was talking about. Real epitome of a soldier. He loved running, but a few years back, he had suffered a rupture of his ACL. No, sorry, not his ACL. It was what was his issue? His Achilles tendon. My mistake. He had an issue of his Achilles tendon down by the heel. He had a rupturing of that, and he hadn't done anything out of the ordinary. He was picking up the pace a little bit, and he just felt it go. And when I evaluated him, I noticed how tight he was. He was extremely tight. He'd been running for years, did not really do a lot of mobility work. And it was interesting because I think I mentioned him in a previous thing. He kind of withheld information from me to kind of see what I knew.
To do that.
I noticed his hips were extremely tight. Extremely. His external rotation of his hips was very poor, and many times that can link into a improper foot strike. So you're striking with your foot either inverted or inversion or eversion. So it's either kind of rotated in or rotated out. So I think that's what was causing the stress in the Achilles and ultimately led to his injury. So I started having him do these warm-up exercises, and at this point, he no longer had the injury. He was running again, but he still had some pain. And had him pretty much really focus on this one stretch, this one mobility thing to do before. And within a couple months, he was like, I'm not even feeling the pain anymore. So it's exciting when you can make a very small change to a program and really see a big improvement. And that's really what training is. Yes, you can design big programs, and of course that's a big factor of it as well. But sometimes it's the little subtle things that we need to look for, and you make a small change, it can really improve an athlete. As someone who's already a great athlete, you're not going to make huge changes. You're not going to make a program they're going to, be running twice as fast when they're already, a professional athlete or whatnot. But by making small, subtle things, we can definitely improve the quality that they play and how well they can continue to function for. So that being said, we're talking a lot about the APFT. I want to kind of talk about why I don't like the APFT and why I think the military really needs to change the way they measure their athletes. Although there is some growing change in the military right now with strength and power, and more athletes getting into more soldiers getting into bodybuilding or powerlifting and CrossFit. For a long time, and even till this day, the main type of training that military athletes kind of pride themselves on is endurance training. A lot of these individuals, they're big into marathons, they're big into long distance running, swimming, biking, and that's because of the APFT. For a long time, because the APFT is kind of what the individuals are scaled on. It's the gold standard for if you're fit as a soldier. So many of these individuals, okay, well, I want to go beyond the 2 mile with the running. That's when they go on to longer races, and they really feel that's a big component. However, when you actually look at the duties of a soldier, they are not putting on shorts and sneakers and going for a 2 mile run through the desert without gear. I've spoken to a lot of soldiers, a lot of officers, and most of them say the average gunfight lasts about 45 seconds. Most of them, when they have to run or sprint, it's usually not more than 10 meters, about the length of a Humvee to get out of, range of an attack. Granted, there is humping, where you're going to have to, ruck, put on your rucksack and ruck, and you may have to ruck for 4 hours to get to a site where you're going to engage in a quick gun battle, and then you're going to have to ruck all the way back. But the type of endurance training for rucking is very different than that of a 2-mile or a faster 2-mile run. I've had plenty of soldiers that were big guys, 6'3", 250 pounds. They could ruck and they could carry more gear than anyone for hours. Yet, make them do the 2-mile run and they struggle. So, at the end of the day, with any sport, if you really want to try to see what an athlete's capable of doing, you want to create what's known as a test battery. And that's essentially what the APFT is. If you're training a soccer player, your test battery is going to be a little bit different than a football player. A football player might be a little bit more about maximum strength. You might have squat and bench and different exercises in there. Where a soccer player, you're going to have more of a oxidative component because the soccer player is going to do a lot more running, and they're going to be a little heavier on the oxidative energy system rather than the phosphagen and fast glycolysis energy systems that a football player would usually have. So you really need to look at what your sport is, what you're trying to accomplish, and design a test battery that matches that. Right now, the test battery for the military is that of more of a long-distance runner. By the standards of the military, they want a light, thin individual who can run fast. So look at the Olympics. Take a guy who weighs, he's 5'10", 120 pounds, and can run the 2-mile in, world record times. But can that individual ruck for 4 hours with 80 pounds on his back? Can that individual pick up a guy in full gear who's probably weighing 200, 250 pounds and carry him or drag him out of harm's way if there's an issue? Can this individual lift and move the heavy mortar guns and the other equipment that a soldier needs to move? Probably not. So, if it was up to me, if I was a commander in the military, I would say, I'd want my individuals to be proficient at military tasks. Who cares if a football player can run a fast 2-mile if they're not great at football? Who cares if a soldier can run 2 miles fast, do a bunch of push-ups and sit-ups if they can't actually do the tasks required of them as a soldier? So, I really think, and at one point I was writing an article on this, looking a little more specifically at the different tasks that a soldier has to do. Now, I'm not saying a soldier shouldn't have to run 2 miles. They, by all means, should have to be able to do that. But I'm just saying, what if we focused the actual components they were tested on more so to what they would have to do in the field? Would we create more soldiers that were more proficient in the field? Would we increase mission success rate? And would we minimize injury? Because right now, doing long distance, they've actually found diminishes strength and power. So if you're doing a lot of long distance running, you're minimizing your ability to explode and move quickly. Could this potentially result in injury for individuals that have to lift heavy weights and move quickly? If now you're diminishing their ability to do that. So it's an interesting topic. A lot of the soldiers that I've spoken with agree with me and feel that the PT test needs to be changed, and that it has not yet been changed due to political and financial reasons dealing with Congress. So a lot of people have worked towards it. I know there was a 3-star general who I believe had a PhD in exercise physiology, and he was working towards it, but hey, he was only a 3-star general, and I guess even at that level, he couldn't get it done. You have to, I guess, either be 4-star general or the commander-in-chief. So it's a tough battle, and unfortunately, I think it's really diminishing our strength, the strength of our armed forces, and jeopardizing the health of our soldiers. So I would really love to see the PT test and the training protocol modified to suit their needs, and I think it will ultimately help strengthen our nation as a whole. Right now, they say they spend about, I read a statistic, I don't know how accurate it is, I think it's about $1.5 trillion a year spent in injuries of our soldiers. So, right there, not only can we make the soldiers healthier and perform better, but we could also minimize the amount of money that's spent on this, and we can put it towards other things, like better training equipment that could really help our military improve even further. So, that's pretty much what I wanted to cover for today, talking about some of the physical components. I'd love to do a future podcast going in more details of the actual physical components that soldiers have to do based on MOS, and talk about how we could design training protocol that would improve those tasks rather than just talking about the APFT. But in addition to this, I want to talk a little bit more about sports psychology. Okay, in the sport world, in the strength and conditioning world, we call it sports psychology. In the military, sometimes it's called mental toughness or resiliency. There's other names that get thrown around. But there's been a lot of ex-military guys, former special forces and special ops guys, who have really spoken a lot about mindset and how to use that kind of mind over matter mentality to get things done in the military, but also in civilian life. So Tim has been doing a lot of reading and a lot of listening to different articles and podcasts that are generated by these individuals. So I want to hear a little bit from Tim on what his thoughts are and who some of these individuals are. So if you're interested in learning more, who you can listen to and read about to gain some more information. So what are your thoughts, Tim?
Two individuals on everything that cover, I feel, physically, mentally, the training aspect to it is Stu Smith, a retired Navy SEAL. He's down in Maryland. He has a program called Heroes of Tomorrow that I'm looking to do, and it's basically in his local community center. He's created this program, this free program for anybody that wants to serve or has served the military, first responders, firefighters, anybody, out there trying to help protect or service the public in any way. You basically go down and he trains you. He can train you specifically on if you're going in for the Navy SEALs, for Special Forces, the Rangers. If you're firefighting, he's a tactical strength conditioning coach. Mark said it earlier in the podcast that I attended the first tactical strength and conditioning practitioners course through NSCA, National Strength Conditioning Association. And basically, it's taking strength and conditioning principles and applying it to tactical athletes. Giving that a name. They're not soldiers, they're not firefighters, they're tactical athletes. They need to be able to perform in different, uncertain environments, doing all different type of tasks, not knowing when they're going to be called on, not being able to stretch, just very, very unpredictable odds. But they have to be able to perform. So Stu Smith, he also has a podcast called The Tactical Fitness Report with Stu Smith. I listen to it every week. He basically is just interviewing previous soldiers that he's worked with, allied soldiers, firefighters, tactical athletes, personal trainers, strength conditioning coaches, and I love listening to him because first you get the mindset of a special forces operator, and you get the training component of it, both sides. And that's what I kind of, as a trainer and wanting to go into the military and serve as special operations, that's the mindset that I'm going into. So that really speaks out to me, and I really resonate with him. Down to earth, really gives you just detailed programming, how to go into, if you're going into the Navy SEALs, what you should be working on, training programs, what's your duration, what's your period. They're shorter podcasts. He likes to do around half hour to an hour podcasts, but they have so much in depth. They have so much information, and they have tremendously helped me through this whole entire process, getting me in the right mindset, and also with training. And that's huge to have a reliable source, especially now there's hundreds of sources out there, but having a reliable source that you get so much value out of. And he's so accessible. He's an author. He has tactical fitness training books. He has the podcast, Tactical Fitness Report with Stu Smith, and he also has Heroes for Tomorrow program. And I'm looking hopefully to go down next month in September. And basically, you just go there, you sign up, you have to sign some type of waiver, and you just train with him. I believe he trains every single day at 6 a.m. in the morning to 8, and they do everything. It's kind of like triathlon training, but it's specific to what you're looking to get into. They swim, they run, they ruck, they do push-up, pull-ups. He also, I follow him on social media. He's like, I don't know how far, but he's very close to Annapolis. So they go down to Annapolis all the time and train there. And from just looking and listening, he really puts you in that environment of pushing yourself to the next limit. So I always say you can only do so much as one person, mentally pushing yourself. I heard that you can only go from Jocko. He's going to be the next person, individual I talk about. But Jocko, he said that you can only go, I think he said like 85 or 87%. That's as far as you can get for you. But having someone else, they can get you that extra 5%. But then the last 2%, they can get you to that 98%. But that last 2, that's that mental toughness. Then it becomes you again. So I thought that was very interesting. You can get really far by yourself, and I always believe this. So I look for you with coaching advice and training techniques, or my own personal coaches through boxing. There's always someone that always knows more than you, and you should be a student, whatever you're doing, and looking to understand, learn, and become a student of that craft. And that's the same exact way that my mindset going into the military, and listening to Stu Smith and Jocko Willink. He's the next one. I guess I'll mention him right now. Also, was in the Navy for 20 years. He has a book out called Extreme Ownership, which is absolutely amazing. He works for Echelon, which is basically a company for the civilian side, and he basically takes everything he learned in the military. He was in Navy SEALs, he was in Ramadi, he was with Chris Kyle, American Sniper. He was with one of the most influential people and group in the SEALs teams at one of the most hostile places in Iraq or Afghanistan. I really don't want to be saying the wrong things. But the book, and it just shows his leadership, what he learned on the field. He applies it to everyday people, civilian people in Fortune 500 companies. And it's very interesting in the book. In one chapter, it goes from, a mission that they were on in, the middle of war. And then at the end of the chapter, they'll go to a company. And it's the same exact principles of leadership, but he just applies it to either war or everyday life. And he always has that. That's his podcast. His podcast is just Jocko. And that's what I really like. First, he gets into the training. He's really into jiu-jitsu and mixed martial arts training. But he really just gets you into a deep, tough, mindset of a Navy SEAL, war stories, what he's been through, death, stuff that people don't want to talk about. That's why he puts his podcast out there, because his fans that listen to him, he wants a specific fan base, and he doesn't care if he offends people or not. This is what he wants to talk about, real topics, and he spends his podcast anywhere from 2.5 hours to 3. I mean, this guy just goes. First, he starts with talking about a book he reads, which I love. He just kind of goes over a book and what this book means, and then he goes into the lessons that he learned, and then he goes into if he had the guest on for that show. It's just I just love his podcast. It's so informational. It's so in-depth. And that one really gets you in the mindset of just the military, what they go through, training-wise, special operators, Navy SEALs. It just kind of covers it all. And with those two personalities, Stu Smith with more of a training side, I would, if you were looking into Stu Smith is more, he's a strength conditioning coach. Jocko is not. But also Jocko Willink, who is an author, podcast, retired Navy SEAL. These are just people that you can learn from and listen to and just try to absorb as much as you can going into this environment, because I try to talk to people. I have friends in the military. It's right at our fingertips, anything we want to know, but you don't know until you're there. And I completely understand that. And I'm just trying to learn as much as I can. So once I'm in the military, I can be like 1%. I can make that difference. And hopefully that will help me. Help the person next to me and myself. That's the mindset I've had since going down my training career. And it's the one that I want to bring with me going into the military. So those two personalities have been huge for this whole entire journey. Stu Smith and Jocko Willink. Did I cover what you asked?
Oh, it's a lot of good stuff, Tim. Both those individuals seem pretty interesting. I'll definitely have to check out some more of their work and the kind of stuff that they're talking about. You said the book was called Extreme Ownership? By Jocko? Yeah. Okay, and then you said there's some books out by the other individual as well?
Yes, he has more of, like, you go to Barnes & Noble and they're like just training programs. I think he has like a Navy SEAL, workout book. He has TRX. So he has like first responders. So he has more books just on training programs.
Gotcha. So he takes more of the personal trainer, strength coach kind of route with that.
Yes.
So he's a certified strength conditioning specialist?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. That's good stuff. So those are some more resources to check out. One day I'd like to put out my own. Hopefully I'll put up my own book on how to train the military, from what to do for the PT test and then kind of beyond the PT test, but more from a strength conditioning standpoint. I'm sure he gets a little bit more into the skill specific components.
He does, but he's probably nowhere compared to the in-depth that you would bring.
Well,
so you would bring a different element to it, Mark. Absolutely.
I'm sure he'll probably have a more skill specific knowledge base, from his years of being in the military. But I think I might be able to provide more of a foundational standpoint. The little things, kind of like some of the stuff I've done with my soldiers. What the little parts that are missing from their program, the things that the military doesn't always focus on. Because I just know when I would do some of the classes that I would do, there were times I would have between 30 and 100 soldiers at once that I was instructing, and little things that the people were just like, I didn't even know this stuff existed. Little things, simple stuff, but they found those little things very helpful. The military, they do a pretty good job dealing with the large amount of people that they deal with. And I think as they get to the higher levels, they can get more specific on the kind of trainings that they do and get more specialized.
Absolutely.
But it's tough. It's when you have a huge group, it's tough to really instruct 100 people at once. It's tough, and I understand that. And I think things are changing. I believe they're working on their next fitness manual. And I think they're going to, I don't know how they're going to do it, but I'm hoping they're going to bring in more of a component of, how to deal with recovery, how to deal with some of these things. And there is a lot of great stuff in the current one. There's a whole section on posture in the FM 7-22. But when you ask, when I speak to soldiers, no one's read it. No one's done that. No one utilizes that. The people running PT for their units don't do it. So, that's part of the question too. The information, some of it's there, but they just don't have the time or maybe the knowledge to incorporate into the training schedule. At the end of the day, people want to train to the test. They say you're tested on push-up, sit-up, run, so just do push-up, sit-up, run. And sometimes they forget that that's not the only things to do. If you're a football player, you don't only play football. There's a lot of other training you do off the field to improve football. And I think that this is what cross-training is. Cross-training is training outside of your primary objective. And I think many athletes today, they do cross-training. They do, resistance training in the gym, and they do these other things. And that's really what a strength and conditioning coach does. My job is not to train a football player to do football-specific drills and that, I'm not running football practices. My background is giving that underlying thing, making sure the athlete is functioning well and they have the proper, strength, power, explosiveness, conditioning, etc., to perform those sport-specific tasks.
Looking at the body.
Yes, yeah, it's looking. I have to take into consideration, the type of athlete an individual is, but I'm looking at the body as the body. I'm looking at an athlete as an athlete. You're an athlete. Let's make you a functioning athlete. And once we get a baseline, then we can start gravitating more towards, of course, training that's going to be more specific to your sport. But again, my job isn't to just come in there and have you, run just football drills. That's what the head coach is for. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes the military, and again, that's why I think they kind of brought us in to do what we were doing, was to give that baseline. Because they were just saying, okay, well, it was very much like a run, fat boy, run mentality back in the day. They didn't teach you how to run. They just said, well, keep doing it, eventually you'll get it. And sometimes you did, but if you're doing it wrong, over time that's going to lead to problems in the long run. So that's pretty much all I wanted to cover for today. Tim, thank you so much for being here and joining me. You've had a lot of great insight and some experience to what you've been doing and all the stuff you've been learning about. Hopefully you found this, somewhat informative, covering
Absolutely.
some stuff on the military. I'm hoping the listeners get something out of it as well. If you have any further questions, feel free to contact us. If you want more podcasts dealing with this topic, again, I could really go into greater depth on the different specific components of the specific tasks that soldiers have to do, and I think that would be an interesting thing, really how to orchestrate, not just PT and basic fitness, but how to really gear towards more specific tasks that a soldier has to do in the field. And I really think that's the direction we need to move in, to really make sure our soldiers can do what they got to do. So thanks for listening, and tune in next time for further podcasts dealing with strength and conditioning.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Always a pleasure, Tim. Always a pleasure.